Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the, as Adele said, the fifth in our webinar series. It's really great. I can see that a lot of you are joining, and it's really lovely to see you all joining. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce both Judy Walker and Peter Shields as TLC faculty members. They will be joining us this evening to go through this, the next in the deep dive around the circle. And so, Judy, I'd like to just ask you, can you just say a few words, please?
Thank you, Roma, and welcome everybody. I know for me, I'm certainly getting an amazing amount of value out of these webinars, and I trust that's the same for you. So we certainly welcome any comments and questions that you have as we go through. So enjoy the webinar.
Thank you. And I know, folks, just so that you may be looking at the little attendees list, Peter has been having difficulty dialing in and getting in on his phone, so we are going to keep our fingers and toes crossed that he will be joining us again shortly. Both Peter and Judy are TLC faculty members for the Leadership Circle in Asia Pacific, which means that they actually both run, facilitate. Many of you have actually been in sessions with them. And they facilitate the workshop for the certification, and they are both experienced consultants in their own right and coaches, and have used the Leadership Circle extensively over the last 4 or 5 years. So welcome, and really appreciate you being with us. And what I'd like to do is to just go through and set up, as you all know, that those of you that have joined us before, that the deep dive around the circle is applicable to both the Leadership Circle profile as well as the Manager Edition. And with a couple of exceptions, that, you know, that in terms of the actual Manager Edition itself, that it's the same structure. We talk about structure determines performance, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. But the Leadership Circle in and of itself as a framework is ideally placed to meet the imperative that so many of the leaders that we support these days, facing the economic current environment and helping us with the complexity of our times. In other words, does the complexity of our mind match the complexity of the environment and the role and the context in which, you know, we're showing up, and therefore do we show up in an effective way? And so what the Leadership Circle helps leaders do is to become, as we all know, more creative, to think more creatively, strategically, to influence innovation across the system, and adapt the organization to the changing demands, and engage and collaborate with key stakeholders and teams, so that that change can be successful. With the exception of a fewer questions, the dimensions are the same in the relating. And so talking about structure determines performance, as we know that in terms of the creative orientation, research shows that the more a leader taps into these creative competencies, the higher the scores that are in these creative competencies, either Leadership Circle profile or the Manager Edition, the more positive the correlations become to both leadership effectiveness in the eyes of others and business performance outcomes. And many of you will remember that there is a webinar that we created that is part of you becoming certified in the Project Center, and the webinar is about the Leadership Circle and the statistics and the validity and the reliability. So again, I encourage you to go back and to actually refresh yourselves in relation to that, because in that we talk a lot about leadership effectiveness and business performance. And then, of course, you know, that in terms of the structure, so the structure is there's a creative structure and there's a reactive structure, and both of them live in all of us. Question is, how much is the creative dialed up? How much are we managing the reactive, or is the reactive managing us? And any overextended or underutilized competencies usually can be traced to some of those self-limiting assumptions and the internal assumptions, which is often going to show up as a dial-up in the reactive orientation. And again, the higher the scores are in the reactive, the more strongly negative the correlations become generally to leadership effectiveness and business performance. As we know, the reactive, we get results. It's the pattern of results over time that is different. It's the amount of energy. And you know, one of the things about Robert Kegan's model and the stage of adult development is how much effort and how much energy is going into achieving the outcomes or getting the results. How much of the self-authoring mind or the outside-in mind is in operation here? What's going on in terms of, is the context defining me, or am I informed by the context? And so that with these two different structures of mind, the correlations to both leadership effectiveness and business performance, and the way that we show up, the amount of energy that we put in, our relationship to authority, these begin to change over time. And as we can see, when leaders begin to make that journey of evolution from the reactive to the creative, results change, relationships change, and so too does the amount of energy and the effortlessness and the choicefulness of individuals. So we do talk very, you know, we do rely heavily on the whole idea that structure determines performance. Our beliefs and assumptions are structures. The stories we tell ourselves are structures. The way we think, the perspective we take are structures. And so when we look at the leadership circle profile as a structure, we see the 18 creative competencies in the outer circle and the 11 reactive styles or tendencies in the outer circle in the reactive half, and we've got 8 inner circle dimensions. A similar structure, manager addition, fewer dimensions. 12 creative competencies in the outer circle in the creative, 9 reactive styles in the reactive, 6 inner circle dimensions. And the other structure that, and often people will say, well, what makes the leadership circle so unique? And one of the key structures that helps leaders really navigate through this continuous turmoil of change and the need for transformation and the need for dealing with complexity and handling ambiguity is, in fact, the way in which we look at the world. And the adult stages of development in the Robert Kegan model, as you well know, sit underneath the framework. The framework of the leadership circle is underpinned by the adult stages of development. And it's this complexity of mind, our capacity to think broadly and deeply and deal with things in a different way, that actually assists us to match, does the complexity of our mind match the structure of the environment, the context we're in, the role that we're fulfilling. And as many of us know, that often leaders are promoted into roles and positions where they begin to have to tread water so much that they feel like they're in over their head. And this is the leadership circle has been designed to bring compassion to those conversations and open up a conversation to help leaders begin to make the journey, often the hero and the heroine's journey, from the reactive into the creative. And then some of the research that we're doing now is, how do we begin that journey from the creative into the integral? And it doesn't happen by accident. None of this happens by accident. we can design our own mental structure and our own mental construct, and it takes intentional leadership. And tonight, what we're going to be doing is looking at the operating system of performance, which we call consciousness, which is effectiveness. And we will be focusing on predominantly on the leadership circle structure and how it's related. And as you well know, that there are the various dimensions around the circle. And tonight we're actually going to be focusing on the relating competencies. And there are 5 of them: caring connection, fosters team play, collaborator, mentoring and developing, and interpersonal intelligence. I will stop talking, I promise you, in a second. And I will be handing over to both Judy and I'm not sure, has Peter joined us yet? It may be you and me tonight then, Judy.
Yeah, no, he's listening in, Roma, but we don't seem to be able to get audio on him, I'm afraid.
Okay, very good. So as we have done in the past, we are maintaining the structure that we have introduced to you right back in the beginning when we began the deep dive around the circle with the complying, controlling, and protecting. And then last time we had the achieving. This time we have relating. We will maintain the same structure. So it'll give us a chance to look at some of the underlying drivers around the relating dimension, and specifically the 5 relating competencies. What's the mindset, physiology, felt sense? We will invite you into some of this conversation. What we're doing here is that we've made a choice to make a description around each of these elements and share examples of how relating can show up when it's high. And by no means what we share with you is an exhaustive list. I'm sure you've got plenty of other examples. And so, and many of you have asked, could we have a copy of the slides? And we will be making those available to you as well after the webinar. So please feel free to write in if you don't receive them, and we can send them to you. So let's begin, Judy, shall we? I can see Peter is back in. Peter, are you speaking, or can we hear you? No, we can't. Okay. So, hello, Judy.
Oh,
hello,
Roma.
Peter.
Yes.
We can hear you. Well done. Talk about just in time. Very good. All right. So, Peter and Judy, I am going to hand over to you. Let me know when you're ready to move from one slide to the other.
Sure.
And I'm hand over to both of you, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us tonight in relation to relating.
You're very welcome. Pete.
We could hear him. He seems to have gone.
Are you there, Pete? No? Okay. So when we're talking about mindsets, we all, of course, have mindsets, and some of them are empowering and some of them are not necessarily empowering. So when we're talking about the creative competencies, and tonight we're particularly talking about relating, it is a very positive and empowering mindset that people have. So there's that sense of abundance, the fact that there seems to always be enough available for everybody. There's not a sense of scarcity with people that have that are high in relating. So there's a theme here as you look through the examples that we've got of supporting others, and it's all with an intention to support others to succeed. Because their mindset is that of sharing the knowledge that they have, because that leads to team success. So it's not a competitive mindset by any means. So there's that sense of working together, playing to win, which of course comes from Larry Wilson. So it's playing to win together. So it's not a competitive mindset at all. There's a real respect for people, you know, acceptance of self and other people as human and fallible. You know, they tend to view mistakes as learning opportunities, and their mindset is to support themselves and others, you know, not to repeat the same mistakes, as opposed to beating themselves and others up. So a real focus on having healthy relationships with people, but, you know, for the sake of the relationship and not so that they're liked and accepted, which of course happens when the default position of complying is dialed up.
Beautiful.
So, Rome, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
That's great. That's maybe we'll move on to the next slide, and Peter, unless if you can speak in, Peter, and we can hear you, you're very welcome to take this on, or else I'm happy to take this, Judy, unless you want to.
Yeah. I'm happy to do. Why don't we bib and bub, whatever. Okay. I'll keep going on this, and you can add in. Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
So, how do our mindsets show up? You know, they are very obvious in our physiology. As you're aware, you know, non-verbal communication is a huge part of communication. In fact, you know,
especially when it's incongruent.
Yes, yes. And it's all about the meaning making. You know, it's upwards of 93%. So our physiology speaks volumes. So generally speaking, the physiology of a person with a relating structure is very open. It's warm, it's inviting, and it's particularly courteous. And I see this in the first dot point there. You know, they're aware of what's happening around them. So, you know, they'll make room in lifts. I don't know if you've ever been on holidays and come down in a lift and there's a group of tourists dying to get into the lift and not even waiting until people get out, or it happens at train stations as well. But relating people are aware, you know, they're very courteous in what they do. They're aware of personal space, but they've also got further down in the dot points, the fourth last dot point, they've got that peripheral awareness. So they're aware of personal space. And whilst they can be totally focused on you, they're also aware of what's happening around them. If someone's there wanting to speak to them, they'll just, you know, turn to them, say, I'll be with you in a minute, and then return and put their full attention on whoever they're speaking to. They're confident people generally, so their posture, it reflects that. They're comfortable in their own skin. So their legs are relaxed, the knees and shoulders are relaxed, there's like an open stance. And you'll notice when you see people speaking with each other that with people with the relating structure, there's like a slight leaning towards you when they're sitting or standing. So people get the impression that they really want to engage with you.
I think that leaning towards is there's an invitation. It's an openness. It's an engagement strategy as distinct from an invasive strategy, which you can, you know, the polar opposite in high controlling structure of mind is that there is an energetic field that comes. That can feel invasive, or it can feel, you can feel the push with high relating structure, and those who are intentionally high in those relating competencies. There's an awareness there, and that peripheral awareness, and there's that often the mirroring and the matching, and not done out of manipulation, but actually because they are in flow. There's an empathy, and you can feel that empathy radar, and it's obvious in the body structure as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, Roma. And it's interesting.
And there's a flexibility, yeah.
Yes, I notice that when I'm doing coaching, and I will set up the table so that I've got some water and I've got the chairs situated around the table, but I like people to sit next to me. And when someone with high relating walks in, they notice that where the water is, and they'll just comfortably come and sit down next to me. But again, I guess with people that are high in controlling, they'll go first maybe to the top of the table or opposite me. And when I invite them to come and sit next to me, there's a bit of discomfort around that. So it's just, again, that desire to connect is very strong.
Beautiful. Should we move on to do one more and then maybe open up and invite some participation just from the audience?
Great.
How about we do the internal felt sense? Again, this is from our intention here is not to stereotype or to, in fact, create an archetype that this is the be all or the end all. These are just we play with these descriptions in relation to when we feel we're in high relating, or when we know others are feeling high in relating. What's the internal world of that leader? What is going on, in the emotional sense and the energetic sense? And I won't go through all of these, but you can see this. But there is this sense of that the world, my safety is not at stake. With the creative structure, I'm not playing not to lose. I'm actually available, and my safety isn't at stake. Doesn't mean to say I don't have fears or anxieties, but there's that sense of I am aware of what's going on inside my body, and I do trust the world, and I trust in others, and I do have that empathy, so that my energy is a sense of availability and enthusiasm, and a deep faith that it will be okay. That and so with that comes a sense of confidence, and often my experience of those that are high in relating, that people around them also begin to feel safe, because there's an energetic field that they feel enveloped by. That those high in relating tend to have people say, that I know you've got my back. I know you've got my best interests at heart. And it's interesting because the felt sense of those that are high in relating actually starts to rub off on others that are high in relating, at a high degree of, emotional safety. And there's a sense of we-ness in here, that trust that we can manage whatever comes up together. And I actually make a contribution to that. Judy, is there anything else that I think there's also that empathy radar, which is an internal kind of compass.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because of their strong internal felt sense. They've got the ability to meet people where they're at. They're often cheery and up in energy, but they're aware of people around them. So, that they'll tone down. They won't come across all cheery if they're interacting with someone that they sense might be down. And when they sense that, because of their care and compassion, they will, appropriately delve to find out what's going on for the person. So it really
internally, and actually, that's probably let's just sort of round this one off, because we are actually, the internal felt sense is very deeply connected to the emotional sense.
Yes, yes.
So one somatic, energetic sense of safety, sense of body, sense of the energy that's flowing through me, and the other is the emotional sense. And as we can see in here, we've already been describing some of these, that deep sense of passion and care and commitment and encouragement. And there's also often a deep appreciation and gratitude for you know, things like feedback. And, you know, a lot of people will say, oh my gosh, you know, feedback, even just the word feedback gives me the shudders. And that my experience of anybody that's high in creative anyway, but and particularly in relating, is always keen to find out, how am I doing in terms of the relationship side?
Mm.
And there's a deep sense of gratitude and appreciation, and a deep sense of generosity for, you know, having open dialogue and open engagement. Grateful for other people's contributions, valuing accomplishments of others. And then Judy and I were talking about this one with Peter, and, you know, this sense of playfulness. It's like, you know, it's okay. Life isn't too serious here. Anything you'd like to add there, Judy? And I think what I'd like to do is, if you've got anything more to add, then what we might open up to. And Adele, do we have any questions? Do we have anybody that's put up their hand?
No, not at the moment, Roma, but now would be a good opportunity if anyone had any thoughts they wanted to share in their experience with the relating, you know, a strong relating type. No, all
Great
quiet.
to see great to see all these names on there. And welcome everybody. It's lovely to have you. I can see some of you are serial webinar returners. It's great to have you with us. So we'll continue, and please, we will do this every so often. We will open up for some more sharing in relation to, next one is the tone and the pitch and you know, the voice. Judy, would you like to take this one?
Yes, sure. So generally their pitch is modulated. Because they're so connected to people, they intuitively seem to get whether to speak, you know, fast or slow or medium, depending on the context and to whom they're conversing with. And often this is at an unconscious level. So again, there's that sense of it's warm, it's inviting, can be flexible, you know, it can be strong. Remember, relating's not a soft style by any means. You know, they can be strong if they have to show tough love. They're able to do that. And remember that the relating structure is the centre of gravity is the heart. So the timber is from that heart energy, from the centre of gravity. And yeah, very engaging and considerate of others. They are unlikely to interrupt a lot. Yeah. Did you want to add anything, Roma?
I'm just thinking about voice and tonality and speed, and I just, for me, it's my experience of those with the high relating structure and those that are showing up with caring connection. I mean, you know, for me, it's the sound of the voice, the speed, the volume, the, you know, the pace and the flexibility. Caring connection, the same, it shows through in terms of all the dimensions, you know, the competencies, fosters team play, collaborator, mentoring, developing, and interpersonal intelligence. And what I heard you say, Judy, is that, you know, and often it's amazing for me how many times I hear this, and many of you may have heard the same, is that those with very high protecting and very high controlling, and I'm about to do a debrief tomorrow actually, where, you know, I took one look at the and it's not what the case study we're sharing tonight, because I haven't done the debrief yet, but I took one look at the profile, and I just have just learned to trust my physiological, my somatic response. And it was, I just had this rush of energy that just came through my body, and it was very high protecting, very high controlling, actually really high in achieving, and systems thinkers quite high, and then courageous authenticity is off the scale. But then you do the sweep through self-awareness and relating and complying, and there's just it's like somebody's just cut a chunk out of the cake and it's missing. So whereas in higher relating, there's that sense of huge flexibility. And so I'm very curious about this debrief tomorrow, to be honest with you. Very curious.
There's a real sense, I think, with people that are strong in the relating, that it's about how they're using their voice. It's not just the words they're saying and what they're saying, but it's how they use that appropriately.
Which is the beautiful segue into then the consciousness around the words that are actually selected. And what comes with that? What comes with the language of inclusion and alignment? In other words, are we aligned? Are we in this together? It doesn't mean that we don't have disagreement. There's that capacity to tell stories. The words are often in a story or an analogy that's high in relating. That's the purpose of telling the story or using the analogy or the metaphor is through the relationship lens. If you remember, this is on the relationship side of the structure of the profile. So the focus is very much around people and being curious around. So the words you will hear people say is, I'm curious about your perspective, or thank you for your contribution, or how can I best support you? We're in this together. Or how do you feel about feedback? Or what's your perspective? Tell me more. So you can see that there is a curiosity often with a degree of questioning. Seeking to understand, seeking first to understand. What is and being aware and conscious and intentional around the impact that I am having on people. And by the way, when high achieving is also part of the equation. And as we know that the research is saying that the most effective leaders are those that are both high in achieving and relating, as long as there is no absence of authenticity, being the center tentpole. And so those high in relating with also an achievement focus and looking through the lens of achievement will be of service to the team's vision, the organization's vision and purpose in order to be able to achieve the results together. Really powerful combination. And my success is not all about me. It's because my success is our success. Together we achieve more. The analogy and the meaning of team. So one of the things that we do encourage in the certification program is to listen out to the language and notice how much of this language is self-authoring kind of language. There isn't the musts or the shoulds or the have to injunctions that often come with, and non-consciously come with the reactive orientation. So there's an intentionality, and often people we can get a felt sense about, where their center of gravity might be, and then they open their mouths and then it can confirm it. Through the language, through the choice of words. Anything to add there, Judy, before we move on to the next?
No, I think it's just noticing that the words are, as you say, they're questions and not statements. So it's all the time. It's the communication stuff. It's really it's an influencing one by the questioning, and people feel that their opinions matter.
And we do have a question.
Wonderful.
From Meryl. Yeah. Adele, I wonder if we could open up and love to hear from Meryl.
Yes. Here we are. So Meryl, we're unmuting you. You're free to speak. You there, Meryl?
Are you there, Meryl? We can't hear you. If you did have a question, maybe you could perhaps write it in the panel.
Yes, and then we could talk to it, speak to it from there.
Yeah. I see that Malcolm has made a comment. Thanks, Malcolm. When you speak consciousness, that Malcolm's saying that in terms of the consciousness, this will often be linked to the values, and of course, then that could be linked to the stages of development. Absolutely, Malcolm. Is there anything? Would you like to say any more about that, Malcolm? Or can you speak, or are you dialing in from somewhere where you can't speak this evening? Very happy to take any more questions or comments or your experience. Let's keep going, and then if you would like to, please put up your hand or write us a little question. We'd love to have this be interactive as much as possible. So let's move on to behaviors and the intention around those behaviors, and how the behaviors often up with the intention when we are in this structure, which we call relating by associated competencies. When high, and again, I like to emphasize that, you know, when these scriptures, we would imagine it when we're in our own high relating, or when we meet people in high and relating. There's this sense of service leadership. And what we mean by that is the desire to see the best in others, to bring out the best in others, to support others, to create those the caring relationships, which will involve dialing up our empathy radar, and to show others how we actually feel. And when the other day, Peter and I are in an engagement with a client, and we started the engagement off with a leadership culture survey for this executive leadership team to get a baseline around the dynamic and the culture that they experience within themselves as the leaders of that part of the organization. And opening up the conversation, we invited the leader of that team to share with the others in the leadership team, all of them extremely intelligent, technically experts, know their field inside out. And there is a key issue in this team around trust and engagement and the relational piece. And so we invited him to share his passion and his commitment and why he took on this role in the first place, and to also share his fears and his vulnerability around what happens if this doesn't work, because it hasn't worked. There's been a complete restructure. These people have been put in this role. They are trusted experts. They are technical experts. But their ability to be able to connect and to influence is vital across the system. And their capacity to coach and to mentor and guide is what's required of them right now, which is not that natural. And for this man to share and open up and to share very, very vulnerably, and I've heard lots of comments since then about how people were absolutely touched by the authenticity that came through. But what really touched them was this: they now began to actually understand what deeply connecting with others can mean in terms of trust and building trust in relationships. And he went first. And he was also, and now what they're doing is learning to do that with each other, but also challenging each other in a way that is for the intention of bringing out the best. So the behaviors will line up with those intentions very often. Judy, anything you'd like to share with that?
Yes. Again, with challenges others supportively, we're back to this sort of tough love idea that if something is happening and they need to give feedback, their focus is they attack the issue and not the person. So the person's able to get the message very, very clearly, and at the same time they feel supported in moving forward. So that comes across, with the care that they have for people. And, they're interested in what people, any work issues that they might have, but just as interested in people's personal life too, because they recognise that what happens at home has a huge impact in the workplace. They show an interest in what people have done on weekends. They know the names and ages of the children and pets, and they'll know if their staff are going through personal issues because they've either picked up something or they've created an atmosphere where they're very open to their staff, the people that work with them, coming to them and discussing personal issues. And I think just linking back to the language that they use, it's not just, this is what I'm saying. They're congruent. What they say is what they do. So the behaviours do line up with the spoken word.
And I do believe that this is some of the link that Malcolm was making as well, is that the behaviours line up with the intentions, and what the underlying drivers for that are the beliefs and the assumptions and the values that we have. So there is a high value here for relationship. There's a high value for achieving together. There's a high value for bringing out the best in others. There's a high value for me taking responsibility in my contribution to conflict or confrontation in relationship. There's a high value around understanding that if you treat people with dignity and respect, there is a greater tendency for them to want to give discretionary effort. In fact, there's no evidence, there's no research that says that you treat people really badly and they'll do a great job. And yet that's contrary to the beliefs and the assumptions that are often underpinning and not often non-consciously running the show when we've got higher reactive tendencies. So what's at risk? Lovely segue into the fact that depending on our true center of gravity and the length of time that we have consciously worked on our own reactive default tendencies, we can still, many of us hopefully are aware of our own reactive tendencies, and that they can kick in. We are still subject to, at times, our own default reactivity. Are we managing it? Can we feel it? Can we sense it coming on and manage it? And what are the practices that we're actually doing in order to be able to slow down the reactivity, not to pathologize it, not to make it wrong, not to deny it, not to project it onto somebody else or label it and judge it, but to actually embrace it. And that's where we'll come a bit later on in this evening when we talk about, the embracing the gifts and the strengths that come with our reactivity. But there are some ways that we can get hooked. And where the relating becomes disempowered relating. So as distinct from empowered relating. So when we talk about relating in the creative, there's a sense of empowerment, and there's a sense of I am the author here, and the impact that it's power from within in order to be able to assist others to also tap into that. When we talk about disempowered relating, then we get into the reactive relating, which is equal to complying. And this particular slide is about what's at risk? How do we actually get in our own way? Judy, would you like to share some of your insights in this one?
Yes, look, this is very close to home. I am particularly strong in the relating structure, but also, you know, I get hooked in the complying. I know when I've worked with other 360s, each time I got my feedback, the equivalent of complying in TLC would always show up really, really strongly. And I did the first certification in Australia back in 2008. Blow me down. I get the results, and there's, even though I didn't see all the beautiful detail of the relating structure, all my eye went to was complying yet again. So I'd known for some time about it, but it actually wasn't until I got into really understanding what TLC was all about and was able to get underneath that behaviour and look at what was driving that. And really, I mean, it started for me at a very early age. I became the nice girl because it wasn't okay to speak up, and if I made a noise or got upset, in fact, I got the one and only whack in my life when I turned on a tantrum. But from then on, the story goes from my mother, oh, but from then on, darling, you were such a good little girl. And, you know, I realised that got in the way. I lost my voice. When I first got into business, if I was in a meeting and there'd be a discussion about something that I didn't agree with, I didn't feel safe enough to speak up in the meeting. You know, good girls didn't do that. But catch me out at the water cooler later on with some of my colleagues where I felt a bit safer, and you know, I'd be really voicing my opinion quite strongly. So it's really helped me incredibly to get down underneath, you know, the fact that, you know, I've done these behaviours in order to feel safe and secure in the past, but does this serve me now? No, it doesn't. And I was really relieved when I did a remeasure of TLC. I'd been working consciously on it, and my complying had reduced considerably. I still get caught, but I'm noticing quicker now. So I'm forever grateful for that realisation.
And my sense is that when in the relating, when my reactive tendencies get triggered, there is a sense there that, you know, that what can trigger that is this feeling of not being valued or being seen as somebody who really cares about the team or the relationship. And so the near enemy for me can really get triggered, or the opposite can get triggered more with me in terms of the opposite. Well, then, you know, if you can't see the contribution or whatever, or I don't feel valued, then bugger it, I'll just go off and do it on my own. Whereas for some of us, the near enemy can get very triggered, and Judy, you were talking about that, is, you know, there's the need to be liked and approved of begins to dial up. And the self-confidence gets low.
And what you'll often notice is how that impacts the rest of the structure of the circle. I like to think of the circle like a spider web. And if you pull on one of the strands of the spider web, it alters the whole structure. And I often notice when I'm coaching people that when there is high complying, which takes away from that empowered relating, often courageous authenticity is low as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And just weaving back to what you were saying is what's going on internally. What are some of the beliefs and assumptions that are actually underlying and underpinning, you know, that actually hook us, you know, hook us into some of the reactivity? And what are some of the underlying beliefs and assumptions that actually allow us to lean into the greatness and the fullness and the empowerment that comes with high relating? And so on this page, on this slide, what we've done is we've listed some of the internal beliefs and assumptions that can show up. And if this comes from the self-development guide, the profile binder, and it's actually listed on page 11 of the profile binder. And these we actually have taken directly from the profile binder, which we call the self-development guide as well. So here are some of the internal beliefs and assumptions that are associated with when relating is high. So Judy, over to you.
Yeah, excuse me. So they've got a strong sense of self. So that they feel whether, regardless of whether people approve of them or not. They trust others, they believe in their capability. And what that means is that they'll let people get on with the job. They don't need to micromanage them, as maybe somebody in high controlling might do. And they're very much, they have a sense of not being judgmental, very unconditional in their support of others, just as they are. And because of the care and the compassion and interest in other people's growth and development, that they really do bring out the best in people. They do this for their own self-interest. They don't do it for their own self-interest, or the fact that they might get something from the person, which then encourages others to give willingly. We spoke about that earlier. So there's always a sense of equal exchange.
What I love, and I know I had a conversation with one of you that's on this webinar tonight. I had a conversation with one of you during the week. Similar experience. When you ask people that are high in the creative, and you talk and you ask, let's say you ask people whose profiles actually show up high in the relating, with a team of people, and their profiles are showing up high in reactive in some way, and asking those who are high in relating to share some of their internal beliefs and assumptions, like, the belief that people have unlimited potential, and that building people up and supporting people is actually really good for business. And that, my role as a leader is to unconditionally bring out the best in others, and that when we're aligned, we can achieve a whole lot more together. And it's just jaw-dropping for some of those that are high in the reactive to hear this, because their beliefs and assumptions are often completely the opposite. And this sense of relating is this soft, touchy, feely stuff. Well, most of us know that the toughest love will often come out of those who are actually high in relating. The capacity to give really powerful feedback for the sake of somebody becoming more effective, or the center of gravity. And it's that no fear in doing that. It's because the beliefs and assumptions underneath say that this is my role, this is, and I'm doing it with the greater good in mind, for the individual, for the team, and for the organization.
And Roma, I see this showing up with leaders who they don't feel threatened by high performers on their team. They're happy for the success, as you say, because they know that building people is good for business. And they don't have this fear of someone taking their job over. If you rise to the occasion and you've got an opportunity to have my job, I move on. So there's not that sense of scarcity or threat. Mm.
Ladies, have you seen the comment that Malcolm's put in there? Judy, I've sent that on to you.
Oh, I'm not sure where to look to see
That's
that.
all right.
I can't
I'll follow it through. So what Malcolm's offering is that he's had a realization that a former mentor demonstrated this style that you're talking about by, one, being willing to take risks with people, and secondly, he would always turn any failure or mistake as a focus on growth and learning from the event. So they were the two qualities that Malcolm remembers.
Beautiful. Yes.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Mistakes are learning opportunities.
Beautiful.
We are human. We all have the capacity to make them. Beautiful.
So we're going to have a look at a case study. And the case study is revolving around a fundamental belief that we hold in the leadership circle, that we encourage when we run the certification programs and any follow-ups, is that, you know, our role is as the guides in the terrain, as people are transversing or transitioning from reactive through to creative, and indeed continuing that journey in broadening and deepening the complexity of mind and the perspective that we take and the stories that we tell ourselves, is meeting people where they're at. And so we ask the question, how is someone or leadership, or those in leadership teams with low relating scores, likely to show up? And I think that, you know, I think we've just talked a little bit about that, and how can we best show up for them to support them? What will it require of you? Here are some questions that we would encourage you to ask yourselves as you enter into a conversation with the leaders and the debriefs and the coaching sessions, and getting curious about relationship to what does empowered relating actually mean? What does it feel like? And what we'd like to do is to share with you a case study of a leader that, interestingly enough, actually all three of us, Peter, Judy, and myself, were involved in a long-term leadership and culture transformation program. And Peter was actually the executive coach for this specific individual, a male in his early to mid 50s, who had been engaged to join the team by the leader of the team, who had previously worked with this gentleman in another business, and they had achieved an enormous result and outcome, lifted the performance of the particular business that they were in, working together with others on the team. And it was a particularly challenging time, and so this leader had invited him to come and join this team. And it's a shame Peter can't share with us some of the coaching, but he did go through this with both Judy and I during the week and late last week when we were actually talking about it. And so both Judy and I can add some value to this. And as you can see, this is a profile of a leader who has some shading. I mean, there is definitely some shading in the creative orientation. Courageous authenticity is actually showing quite high, so systems thinking, so strategic focus and community concern, and most definitely that we can see that there is a weighting in the reactive orientation. And Peter, if Peter were telling the story, he would say that there was a pivotal moment when, and it was actually in the first debrief, in the very first debrief, and it happened again a little bit later on in the next coaching session. Now, this guy, this leader, was from the moment that I met him, what came through to me was that he was disinterested. He was distant and aloof. His behavior was checking his mobile phone, engrossed in his mobile phone the majority of the time in the very first meeting that we had. Looked across the room, didn't say anything, but almost grunted. Was very busy doing other things, but didn't make much contribution. And then towards the very end of the meeting, then revealed that he'd been looking up the website to see what this was all about. And aren't I clever? Because now I have all the answers, and and thought that was really funny. And then turned up to the debrief session for his very first sighting of this beautiful profile, and turned up late. There was no apology whatsoever. Sat down with Peter. Peter started going through the conversation. They started, with the normal questions, context questions, patterns and habits questions. And the phone rang. And no excuse me or whatever, and just took the phone call. And Peter decided at that very moment that when he got off the phone that he would share with this leader the impact that was having on him, the impact of him turning up late, the impact, and Peter knew he was taking a risk, and the impact of taking a phone call, and what came up for Peter in that moment, and shared with him that what he was experiencing, the way that this guy was showing up, was exactly the energy that is showing in his profile, particularly in the controlling and the protecting. And apparently he just went very quiet, and then slowed down enough to be able to say, yes, you're right. And apparently it happened again in the second session, and this time he made an excuse. The phone rang and he made an excuse, and he said, listen, I apologize. I want to take this phone call because it's my daughter. She is overseas, and I just want to check in and make sure that she's okay. What also then the journey began in terms of, well, how are you getting in your own way? And the coaching involved going through one of the processes that we have is looking at, we call it the one big thing process, and so it is actually slowing down, and it's actually that many of you were at the Lisa Leahy workshop, so it is very much an immunity to change map. And the one additional piece that we put in there is, what is a key objective, what is a key business objective that is actually really important, it's critical for you to achieve for yourself, for the team, for the business. Something that you've got skin in the game, something that's important to you, but it actually the team and the business will benefit from, and that it's something that you can measure over a 6 to 12 month period. And what is one big thing in your creative orientation, in your own profile, if you were to choose one big thing that will help develop your creative competencies, can you describe that behaviorally so that it is visible to others? And this is, he said that he believed that as a leader that what he wanted to do was to be very clear about his expectations and other people's expectations of him around and through relationship. And so the behavioral examples were that he would have one-on-ones with people. He would actually ask questions about expectations, and he would be more consistent and persistent which you can see there's a lot of persistency in this profile, which is enormous strength and gift. But he would be more consistent and persistent and focused on the positive aspects of relationship, because when he showed up in high relating, it was an extraordinary transformation in this individual. And you can see that there's high pleasing and high belonging, and that pleasing and belonging was very much around making sure that he stayed safe with the leader of this team, which was dragging down his capacity to be able to form relationships and trusting relationships, even strategic relationships, with his peers and his colleagues, and indeed his own team, because he was so busy trying to prove that he had the answers in order to be able to feel safe and secure, because he absolutely needs the job. And more than anything, this guy, he worked harder, longer hours than anybody, and it was not unusual for him to do all-nighters and to stay in the office. And yet he had a family back at home, etc. And so that slowly, very slowly, he began to realize that what happens for him when expectations are not met, and part of it is because hasn't been clear about those expectations, is that his frustration starts to show up, and it comes across as autocratic and critical, and many times that he would shoot barbs across the bow, and they would land. They'd be like hand grenades landing in somebody else's lap.
And Roma, do you remember his, sorry.
Go ahead, yeah.
I'm just thinking at times his body language absolutely reflected that. You know, he would sort of tap his foot and shake his leg almost constantly when he was getting frustrated, and his whole body language changed.
Yeah, or it was almost like he withdrew to the corner and just and shut off. There wasn't, you know, or would spit the dummy. And said, look, I can't be bothered with this, and just storm out. And he was known for doing that. And for him, it was really easy to just take over, you know, like I'll just get in there and do it. And as you can see, there's high driven, there's high perfectionistic, and there's this real need to prove that I can do this. And got sick. The consequence of this profile for this individual leader, this unrelentless pace and this unrelenting desire to prove that I can do this more than anybody else and I can do this alone, he actually got really sick. And ultimately got to understand that really what he was doing is that he actually is quite relational, cares deeply about community, is very much involved in community, and almost wears it like a badge of honor, which is where some of the high arrogance was coming in. Aren't I great? I'm doing this for the community. But was often absent, out of work. I mean, you know, worked such long, hard hours, and then would be absent for days on end. And what he actually understood, his competing commitment, what was going, he really wanted, he wanted the business to succeed. He wanted to be part of that success in the business. He was willing to take the risks. But underneath all that, what he realized is that he was avoiding taking on too much responsibility, making commitments and keeping expectations with others, because he was fearing any kind of conflict, and ultimately underneath that, fearing failure. So he was dialing up as much as he could his high protecting. The driven would kick in, and with the leader of the team, he would dial up the pleasing and belonging, and it was exhausting. Ultimately, the big belief and assumption he got down to was that, you know, I'm helpless. It's my fault. If people aren't happy with the information I give them, it's my fault, and I am just helpless. So the journey for this actually started to really value the time spent in these. We had a series of workshops, we had a debrief, and we had 5 coaching sessions embedded into, as well as working on the one big thing. And he would come and go from that. When he was there, I was in a number of sessions with him, and I just went, wow, this man is completely transformed. He began to understand how he was getting in his own way. And the coaching continued with Peter being really honest and really compassionately honest, but holding him to account and making sure that he continued the journey of checking in with his own body. His own radar was giving him a sense of when the reactivity was going to kick in.
And Roma, for me, that is that's the key, really, in terms of how Pete dealt with it, in naming what he was experiencing in that first session. You know, he did take a big risk with that, but as consultants, we need to do that. We need to challenge people, and just naming what we're experiencing. I mean, it obviously was a huge impact for this guy, and that was the beginning of the journey, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the realization, the epiphany that I'm doing this to keep me safe and secure, and that it's backfiring. Excuse me, it's actually backfiring. And it's not only backfiring in terms of relationships with my peers and the client and the stakeholders. It's actually backfiring because my family is suffering and I ultimately am suffering. So sometimes it takes for the pain to be felt in order for the transformation and the transition, you know, the transcend and include. So, you know, when I saw him at his best, he was highly authentic, extremely values driven, cared deeply about human beings, and also cared enormously about the business and the strategy and the sustainability, and really understood the impact that he was having from a self-awareness perspective. And it was like a same person to look at, but a completely different energetic field. And very, very contributed enormously when he was able to get out of his own way. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that his body actually did suffer and slowed him down, and then he started to really understand. So sometimes it takes for that to actually happen. Anything else, Judy, that you can add there?
No, I think you've covered that very well, Roma. Thank you.
So he realized, his realization was his relating was low. You can see even the value that he put on relating here, as he was so busy spinning his own wheels and so busy taking care of himself and making sure that he stayed safe. And look at his own self-assessment in complying and protecting and controlling. And so his journey was, he realized that yes, that he could very easily use the controlling energy, move it into and shift it into the achieving energy and the strategic focus and the systems thinking. He can use the protecting energy for that. And I mean, he was great at connecting dots when he was out of his own way. But he also realized that part of his driven was he's trying to do all of this together. So he realized that the value and the power of relationship, and through that arrogance, is for him to be able to step in and mentor others into their own greatness and their own sense of confidence. So, you know, some of the coaching strategies that we work with individuals are meeting them where they're at when they're low and looking at this. Is this in fact a move of opposites, or is it in fact a move of the near enemy? And so in this, if we were to, and in his case, he chose that he could very much use some of the near enemy to go up into achieving, but he also realized that through purpose and vision, and he was really instrumental in starting to roll out some of the purpose and vision that was then shared with the whole business of over 1,000 people in this part of the business. That in order to do that he had to get curious and had to start setting expectations and helping people understand expectations. So his move was, he really wanted to use purposeful and visionary and strategic focus through to the relating area. And as we know, the correlations between relating and controlling, they are, and it is a negative, and it's a high negative correlation. So the more controlling are, the chances are that it will have an impact on our relationships, on how people see us in terms of caring, connection, collaborator, team play, mentoring and developing interpersonal intelligence. That leadership effectiveness and controlling, this often shocks people, you know, that it's not, it's a moderate negative correlation, but it is still a negative correlation. There are some aspects around controlling that can add to leadership effectiveness, but there are also equally aspects that can detract from our leadership effectiveness. Whereas look at the correlation between leadership effectiveness and relating. Tells a very different picture here. We've got a negative minus 0.42. We've got a positive 0.83 leadership effectiveness and relating. And so some of the journey that we encourage, and Judy, you may want to share some of the strategies that you use here, is, you know, in helping people understand what are the how do I show up? I don't even understand how to show up in this way.
So the questions, as you know, they appear in the client's report. And this is where I would first take a client, if they're curious about the meaning of one of the competencies, I would take them to the questions first. And then that then can become part of, you know, the development plan that you start working on. Now, if it's someone that's not strong in relating and they start thinking about, oh, I've got to care deeply about others and be compassionate and form warm and caring relationships, all that warm, fuzzy stuff. Oh, my God. And then you start to hear some of the beliefs and assumptions that are driving that. So, yeah,
and sometimes, you know, when they say that, then I will go in and say, okay, let's look at team play. Let's look at what's showing up in team play, and then watch how their engagement shifts or not in this conversation. You know, creating a positive climate. You know, I promote high levels of teamwork through my leadership style. I share leadership. So what does that mean? How would I do that? You know, maybe through the focus of results, we can start to do that slowly, or to then look at the questions in relation to, you know, collaborator, and what do they actually, how would you show up if you were showing up in this way, and where do you bump up against your own beliefs and assumptions in relation to this? Coming up with common ground for agreement, or negotiating in the best interest of both parties, or looking at the whole mentoring and developing piece. What does that mean? And making these, and helping them make connections and make meaning around what these mean to them, and what are the baby steps that they can actually begin to take, and not too many steps all at once. Because remember, when we're high controlling or high protecting, we may want to just get on and just do it and bite off the whole elephant all at one time.
That's key, I think, Roma, being able to chunk it down into little manageable steps, because the beliefs and assumptions that get in the way of them being able to do this, they've had them for a long, long time. You don't, you know, working on our beliefs and assumptions is a lifetime journey. So it needs to be...
And the enemy will be speed. The enemy will be the need for speed. Often in the polar opposite. Not so much in complying. When the complying is there, the enemy will be fear around, you know, not being safe. And so let's talk about an enemy. We're talking about enemy and near enemy. Here are two aspects around, you know, complying is the near enemy of relating. But oh, actually, what's happened here? This is interesting, Judy. Yes. So complying is the near enemy of relating. And we've, on one side, on the left-hand side, we've got relating, high relating, what we call empowered relating. And then we've got, looks like the individual is using the gifts and the strengths of complying. So there's no dial-up, there's no need to feel safe or secure or, you know, my identity is at risk here. On the left-hand side, it's showing an individual whose center of gravity is very much around the relationship and empowered relating rather than disempowered or reactive complying. On the right-hand circle, you can see that the dial-up is in complying, think that they're relating, but in actual fact, others don't see that. And so this is why we call it the near enemy. I think that I'm showing up in this way, but in actual fact, there's something going on underneath the surface that others don't see me showing up in that way. So it's not, in fact, serving me, it's actually holding me back, and I might be getting in my own way. And so often the move, the natural move that we talk about is, let's use, if we're not going to move from controlling or protecting through to relating. And that move can happen, but often it is like walking into the eye of our own shadow, what we despise the most. Those that have got high complying, and as you could see, this leader had a degree of complying also, cared deeply. And the natural move, or the more natural move, is to use this path of least resistance. From let's take the natural focus of relationship and to start to open up and to start to get curious about how others feel and to find my own voice in there and to actually demonstrate the care and connection and the sensitivity and understanding that others have got needs, etc. And do this in service of the team and in service of the relationship, with the focus on all of us in this together rather than me keeping safe and secure and worthwhile. And when we begin this journey over time, and many of you would have used this, is harvesting the strengths in the complying and the gifts to grow it into the relating orientation. Path of least resistance, Robert Fritz, and really powerful coaching strategy to help leaders move through that. And ultimately to sit in and to understand that nothing will ever go away until it has taught us what we need to know. And there is beauty, there are gifts, there are strengths. It's a strengths-based model. The leadership circle is based on a strengths-based model. When we can harvest those gifts and the strengths without the need for self-protection or the defensiveness that comes when our fear or our anxiety or our worry or our concern kicks in around identity and worth and safety. That's when we begin the journey and we can flourish into the creative orientation. And by the way, when our operating system boots up in the creative orientation, we have choice about when we can use complying, protecting, and controlling, because that's what the environment requires. But it's not booting up on a reactive operating system. It's booting up on our creative, which is much more choiceful and self-empowering and self-authoring.
Roma, there's that lovely analogy that we can view reactive tendencies like weeds in the garden that need to be pulled, yep. Or we can choose to view them as seeds, nurture them, fertilize them, and then harvest the gifts and express them, as you say, from the creative. I love that analogy. I can
still remember the workshop that Robin Hartley said that in. Yes.
I can too.
Yes. Yeah. So, folks, we are coming towards the end of this webinar. We will stay open for 10 or 15 minutes. In the past, many of you have actually wanted to share and to talk and to open up at the end of the webinar. We will keep it open for as long as you would like to do that. This is a reminder that the next webinar series will be on the 3rd of September, and it will be on authenticity. And you will have with you the wonderful Judy Walker, who's been with us tonight. So thank you so much for your contribution and sharing your wisdom and, you know, really demonstrating high relating in this. And Peter, thank you for being willing to work with us on this. And unfortunately, we weren't able, from a technology perspective, we weren't able to connect with you tonight. I know you're on the line. I know you can hear us. So thank you for your contribution. And next time, we will also be joined again by Sarah Connelly and another member from the community. So thank you for staying with us. Lovely to see all these great faces and great names. There are some questions, and so let's open up. Do we have any questions and comments that we're aware of, Adele?
There's no hands up, Roma. Malcolm's, he knows where his chat pane is. He's offered a comment, which I've passed on to you.
Yeah, and Nikki, and yes, you did. You passed that on to me. This reminds me of this. And Nikki has made a comment here as well. Hi, Nikki. Going back to the leader's profile.
Yes.
Saying that his self-assessment on interpersonal intelligence looked like a cry for help. So let's shoot back to that. Sorry about this, folks. Just going back to this. Ah, yeah, good spot. Interesting that this is what we would call the potential of some golden shadow. People are seeing this as being, he's scoring, other people are seeing him at the 50th percentile for interpersonal intelligence, and he is scoring himself, it looks like, close to 0. Very well spotted there, Nikki. And one of the things that he said in his one big thing, immunity map exercise, was this fear of conflict. That he actually does have a fear of conflict, and this, so that just and he was actually owning the fact that he wasn't taking responsibility or owning up for his contribution to the conflict that he was also partly responsible for creating. So really good spot there. Really good spot. Anybody else? Anybody would like to share?
And then you've just got that comment from Malcolm, Roma.
Yeah, this reminds me of Katzenbach and Smith's McKinsey's Wisdom of Team study, in which they discovered that what differentiated high-performing teams from real teams was that the individuals were deeply committed to one another's development. Fits right into the relating style. Absolutely. Deeply committed to one another's development. And when he was showing up as deeply committed, he really showed up as being deeply committed to his peer group development and to his direct report development and to the development of the client, by the way. Lovely. Love that differentiation between high-performing teams and real teams. Thanks, Malcolm. Anybody else?
No, looks all quiet.
Has anybody got any comment? Anybody would like us to open up the microphone? We're now just gone past 8:30. Would love to open up and share with anybody, hear some wisdom from the group this evening. You are being very quiet this evening, everybody. Very good. Well, Teresa. Teresa just put a question, but it hasn't landed yet. Did you want to?
Oh, she's just saying thank you. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for the opportunity to connect. So thank you.
Thanks, Teresa.
And folks, we will be putting this recording through the email, so you will have access to it and to the slides as well in the next couple of days.
So thank you. Thank you, Adele, for staying with us and opening it up, and for all the work you do behind the scenes in relation to making sure that we're on track and that the invites have gone out and that
my pleasure.
And that the webinar works. And Judy, again, thank you for your insights. And folks, the next webinar will be on the authenticity dimension. And again, just as a reminder, I'll flick through to the end that the webinar will be on September the 3rd. The one after that will be in October. It's the 22nd of October. And we will be reminding you at the end of the next webinar, the one on the 3rd of September, that daylight saving will have actually begun here in our part of the world, and so it will actually make an impact on those of you that don't have daylight saving, whether you're in another state in Australia that doesn't do daylight saving, or in fact in somewhere in Asia Pacific. So the times will actually shift, and we will remind you of that in the next webinar. I will not be with you on the next webinar, but Sarah and Judy and one of our other valued members of the community will also make a contribution and share some wisdom around the authenticity star. So thank you. Great to have you with us again.
Everybody.
Yes, thank you. Good evening.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.